New York Times wasn't on the story. No other newspapers were on the story. Our own national political staff at the Washington Post did not believe the story, tried to convince Ben Bradley, who was then the editor of the paper, that we were, these young people on the Metro staff were running amok, and it ought to stop. We kept going and waiting for somebody to join us in doing this, waiting for some ratification that what we were doing was right, even though we knew all our stories were accurate. And we didn't have any idea that it might lead to the resignation of the president, but we knew it was getting higher up in the government all the time and getting more and more nervous about what we were doing until towards the end of the year of 1972, with the election coming in November, Walter Cronkite was paying close attention to the Watergate stories, and once again, just like with Vietnam, he decided something's going on here that we should be working on. And he had some of his young Washington Bureau reporters in Washington join the reporting. Leslie Stahl, who you see on television now in 60 Minutes, was a young Washington Bureau reporter for CBS. She was assigned to Watergate, working alongside Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. But they had a problem in that they couldn't figure out what can you put on television from this story. It was not a visual story at all at that point. There were no trials and no hearings or anything like that yet. And so he decided that the best way to do it was to have two special reports on the CBS Evening News about Watergate. And his visuals were the Washington Post, holding up front pages of our stories, and pictures of the people involved in the story and so on. And against the wishes of his own bosses who ran CBS, he devoted the first, I think, 15 minutes of one night's newscast, a half-hour newscast, 15 minutes of a half-hour newscast, devoted that single story. And then about a week later, another 8 minutes to that same story. And suddenly the world changed. He verified what we were doing. Walter Cronkite said, this is a story. Now the New York Times hired Cy Hirsch to compete against us. And for my only time in my entire journalistic career, I was so happy that we had a tough competitor and that Cy occasionally broke stories we didn't have, because now what we were doing was validated.